There's no way to talk about The Last of Us Season 2's shortcomings without comparing it to the games. And something I hate to point out is that the show is painfully mediocre.
I'm gonna be a dad.
It's not outstandingly good, nor is it laughably bad compared to the games. It's just barely passable,
which I'm afraid is even worse.
A big reason for this mediocrity comes down to the acting and writing. Bella Ramsey is a less capable actress compared to Ashley Johnson, who played Ellie in the games. And in a season where Ellie's the sole focus, the subpar acting sticks out like a sore thumb.
The community!
The community!
4 fucking seconds! It took you 4 fucking seconds to piss me off again!
It should never be the case that this face, made up of a collection of ones and zeros, is objectively more expressive than this real human with a real face and real facial muscles, but sadly, this is where we are. I hate to be that kind of guy, but one of the most crucial aspects of a good story is the actors both looking like and embodying the characters, and neither happens here. I don't have any hate towards Bella Ramsey, but I definitely blame the casting directors for making a choice they knew would get a lot of backlash. Bella so clearly doesn't fit the role of a 19-year-old Ellie that it's distracting. She comes off as very unlikable and immature, and let's be honest, Bella's acting isn't exactly Emmy-worthy either.
And you wasted it.
Neither is anyone else's in the show, for that matter. Even if the acting's world-class, which it's not, the writing isn't exactly good either. In fact, I'd say it's god-awful. The writers are constantly too hand-holdy and infantilizing.
Ellie and Dina are alone and they're scared. And we wanted to show that by having a scene where Ellie looks into the camera lens and says, "I'm alone and scared."
They think we can't read between the lines, and sometimes things that should go unsaid are just spelled out for us with no nuance in the most frustrating way possible, as if we're little children who cannot think for ourselves. This is something that's objectively worse than the games. For some reason, the writers forgot the most important rule of storytelling: show, don't tell. And the most blatant example of this is the therapy scene. Aside from the fact that in-game Joel would probably never be seen within a 5-mile radius of a shrink, and that the writers added something that was not in the source material and was completely unnecessary story-wise to probably spread an agenda, this scene is by far the worst written one dialogue-wise, and it's mainly because the show doesn't trust that we'll have the mental capacity to understand Joel's struggles. And no, I'm not an anti-therapy snob. There's nothing wrong about therapy, but there is not a single point in the games where Joel complains to a therapist, or anyone for that matter, that Ellie doesn't want to talk to him. Joel's frustrations in The Last of Us 2 are only implied. Here, his frustrations are shoved down our throats in the most annoying way and with no subtext, as if we'd be too stupid to pick up on his feelings otherwise.
I see her around town, gives me a nod like I'm a stranger or some asshole.
Nicely done, Joel. Why don't you start turning red and steaming from your ears like a train to explain to us how angry and sad you are? We don't need to see him say that he's frustrated for us to understand that he's frustrated. He spent the better part of an entire year traveling halfway across the country with someone. He risked his life to save her, only for her to hate him. No shit, he would be disappointed. We didn't need to see him talk about that for 5 minutes to understand that. And the same goes for Joel saying,
"Because I love you,"
which he never said in the game. Again, in the games, his love for her is only implied. Because, of fucking course, we know he loves her. One doesn't simply kill everyone in an entire hospital to save someone because he's indifferent to that someone. The writers forego all forms of subtlety to instead opt for an "I'm very angry" or "I'm very upset," which doesn't help. I don't care how much of this is the fault of the actors versus the fault of the writers, because at the end of the day, all I see is an awful TV show and I don't really care whose fault it is. And the problem is that they had a blueprint set up right in front of them. They had the fucking T-ball set up, and they still messed it up. It's very rare that a writer gets a second chance to retell his story and improve on it, and 5 years have passed since The Last of Us 2. But it seems like everyone doubled down on the game's countless issues instead of learning from their mistakes, which is bad enough on its own, but doing that on top of adding things that actively make the story worse is just beyond me. I can go all day about just this one horrible aspect of writing.
Maybe she got what she deserved. Maybe she did.
But you get the point. The writers don't show, they tell. Even when they show, they tell anyways, just to make sure you didn't miss it. It's frustrating beyond belief. The writers also do this weird, outdated cliche where characters are only fleshed out right before they die. For example, we finally get to know Jesse more during the episode where, you guessed it, he dies, which takes away from his death because everyone, even this guy with no medial literacy, sees it coming now. We have Jesse giving entire monologues saying, "Golly, I hope I don't die today because I have a lot of life ahead of me."
I'm gonna be a father, which means I can't die.
Shut your f***ing mouth!
I am not dying out here.
Shut the f*** up, you c***!
If you told me this was a parody of the cliche, then I believe you, but no, the writing is just that bad. You might as well have him wear a t-shirt saying, "I'm going to die in episode 7. This is very different from the game, which embraced the shocking nature of Jesse's death, having it happen with no buildup or catharsis. Jesse was talking about his friendship with Ellie a few seconds ago. Now his entire life is gone in an instant as he falls on the ground like a sack of potatoes, with nothing ever hinting this would happen beforehand. Ellie is then forced to take action with no time to grief. Like it or not, this is a tremendously bold move, and yet it's still not half as bold as Joel's death. Joel and Abby's group were in good spirits a few seconds ago, and now Joel's kneecap is gone and all he can do is flail around helplessly because he's as good as dead anyways. This is very different from the show, where you see everything coming from a mile away because Abby's perspective was explored in the first episode, which removes all mystery from this sequence. And this makes the show objectively worse because it fails to understand why certain events were so effective to begin with. Joel's death was so shocking because it all happened in an instant, in a very brutal and dismissive way. There was no extended 10-minute monologue telling us exactly why Abby is doing what she's doing. This makes the audience have more information about Abby in the moments leading up to Joel's death than Joel himself, which is almost never a good thing. You can have the character know more than the audience, which should be done sparingly, and if pulled off can make for amazing plot twists. And I'll get back to that later, but almost never does the reverse work. You need a Shakespeare-level writer to pull off a dynamic where we know more than the character. And this dynamic is usually used as a comedic device, like in this scene from Breaking Bad, where we know the answer but Jesse doesn't.
Liar. Yes!
But hey, don't you worry, because the writers fill this gap by spoon-feeding us every piece of information that Joel needs to know about Abby. The game does this the best, where we know exactly as much as Joel and nothing more. And Abby's backstory is explored later on, which makes Joel's death very shocking in a good way. The saddest part is that Joel died never knowing the reason why Abby did what she did. Although HBO might not believe it, this single flashback being rearranged and put at such an early point in the story has an unexpected butterfly effect on the rest of the show. Because while rearranging flashbacks might seem inconsequential, they recontextualize the story in a not very good way. The whole point of The Last of Us 2 is to hate Abby so much that you'd do anything to see her dead, only for her to be humanized in the second half of the story. Seeing Abby's motivations and feelings being explored before she even kills Joel undermines Ellie's story, and it blows my mind that the people who spent months writing, shooting, and editing this show made it without realizing that. Abby outright explains to Joel exactly why she's doing what she's doing in the most exposition-heavy scene since, well, actually, since the previous episode.
We kill him slowly.
Hell, some people even said that Abby is more likable than Ellie now. Many might see this as an improvement compared to the game, but for me, liking Abby is not supposed to be the case until the point where you switch to her story. People empathizing with Abby necessarily ruins Ellie's whole revenge-fueled death wish thing because it forces us to humanize and understand Abby instead of hating her. And hating Abby is the only thing that pushes Ellie's story forward. Don't get me wrong, they could have done something great, where they humanize both characters and have their stories play out simultaneously. But rearranging this one flashback while keeping everything else the same was not the right move. But we cannot talk about misusing flashbacks to ruin the story without talking about the worst example, the porch scene. The Last of Us Part 2 leaves us mostly empty-handed regarding why Ellie feels the way she does towards Joel. All they use to fill us in on their relationship is 2 flashbacks. The scene where Ellie finds out the truth of what happens in the hospital, and the scene where Ellie forgives Joel for what he did. These are two completely different scenes both tonally and emotionally. Each scene took a separate emotion, anger and forgiveness, and explored them individually in separate scenes to their fullest extent. And these two scenes took place many years apart to explain the broad strokes of what happened in the 5 years since the first game. In short, Ellie started hating Joel after finding out what he did, then came to forgive him years later to embrace the person who loves her most. These two scenes are the beating heart of The Last of Us Part 2, because it's all Naughty Dog gave us to explain why and how Ellie and Joel's relationship devolved into what it is. So you'd think it would be of utmost importance to preserve these two scenes as much as possible, to try to maintain the emotional core of The Last of Us, right? Well, apparently I'm a dumbass for thinking that, because the show butchered these scenes so hard that it's bordering on a parody of itself. That's not even mentioning the acting, which doesn't hit nearly as hard as it does in the game. But let's just pretend that the acting in this scene is perfect, which it's not, and focus on why this scene is weak structurally. Instead of individually fleshing out each emotion in separate scenes, the show haphazardly merges both scenes into one Frankenscene, and to call it jarring would be to understate the meaning of jarring. The game's Ellie took years to finally find it within herself to forgive Joel. And by the way, this is not easy. It's not easy for Ellie to love Joel deep inside and wish to forgive him, but not be able to do it. Keeping this dynamic for 5 years is fucking excruciating. And it's probably even more excruciating to actually come to the decision to forgive Joel. On the other hand, the show's Ellie jumps to that conclusion in literally seconds. While game Ellie was so destroyed by that confession that she broke down in tears, show Ellie was so composed that she went from hearing Joel say the truth to coming to the final decision to forgive him in literally 2 minutes. This is not normal. The jump between these two emotions is unnatural, and it undermines the emotions that Ellie and Joel are supposed to be feeling at this moment. In trying to merge these two separate scenes into one, each with their own unique emotion, the show ruins both. But guess what? This isn't even the biggest problem with this scene. The biggest problem is that this scene was misplaced. In the game, the hospital scene was placed around the midpoint of Ellie's journey, and the porch scene was placed at the very end. Placing this scene at the very end was not unintentional. This is the point where Ellie has lost literally everything: her family and community, her soul, and most importantly, her fingies. This single scene that comes directly afterwards recontextualizes the entire story. Up until this point, it would have been safe to assume that Ellie's entire revenge quest was simply to avenge Joel, to come to terms with his death in an attempt to find some peace. But the porch scene shows us that, instead, the reason Ellie did all of this is because, yes, she did just barely take the first step in forgiving Joel a few hours ago, only to have it snatched away from her by Abby. After years of dismissing Joel and living separately from him, she was just starting to rekindle her relationship with him, and Abby took that from her. This recontextualizes the entire story of The Last of Us, almost as much as a plot twist would. This ties back to what I said before. Ellie knew more about Joel than the player, and adding this scene improves the themes of the story. Instead of being a story about regret and revenge, it becomes a story about forgiveness. All of this happens after the story climaxes. All you have left is to watch the credits roll and sit there like... Ellie's life was just starting to mean something, but Joel took that from her, killing Abby's dad in the process. Ellie was just starting to forgive Joel, but Abby took that from her, killing Joel in the process. The end of the story shows the masterful conclusion of both stories, where Ellie forgives both Joel and Abby for what they did to her, all in one fell swoop. This is absolutely S-tier storytelling. But hey, let's just plop the most important scene of the entire Last of Us franchise in the middle of an episode, because it's probably not that important anyways, right? Changing the placing of this one scene affects everything, and again, it blows my mind that the writers didn't think it would be that significant. All else being the same, this scene is objectively worse than this one, and it worsens the story for no apparent benefit. Pedro makes Joel sound unsure of himself.
But if somehow I had a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again.
Versus,
if somehow the Lord gave me a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again.
And again, the writing is just awful.
I would do it all over again.
Because you're selfish.
Joel says the fireflies could have made a cure.
Could they have made a cure?
How would you know that? Are you a mycologist? This hits us over the head with a message instead of embracing the ambiguity of the situation. With all due respect, Game Joel didn't give a shit about the cure. He saved Ellie not because he logically weighed his options, but because they were about to take the only light left in his world. Having everything in this scene focus on the cure weakens Joel as a character. Instead of giving Joel some credit for understandably trying to protect the people he loves, the writers remove all of his morality, ignoring his motivations while focusing solely on the cure, as if anyone would think rationally in a situation like this. They do this while simultaneously disregarding over a decade of fan theories and discussion about the Firefly's competence and their ability to make a cure. And let me be very clear, making a cure is impossible. We saw two experts give their opinions on this matter, and both said,
"No cures, they don't exist, it's not even possible to make them."
So it seems like the showrunners want to have their cake and eat it too, by telling us making a cure is impossible, then trying to get us to emotionally buy into the fact that the Fireflies of all people can make a cure. This doubt makes Joel's decision carry less weight than it did in the games, where the only doubt that existed about a cure being possible was driven by theories. The show, however, actively weakened their own story by instilling doubt into our minds on two separate occasions, one of them being in literally the very opening scene of the show. How can you be so dumb as to hammer down a point so hard, yet still want to force feed us the fact that making a cure was possible? Even if making a cure was possible, it wouldn't have helped. If anything, it would make the distribution of power more imbalanced. The only thing that matters is that Joel thinks making a cure was possible and didn't give a shit anyways, but why make him say that out loud? Why add something to the game that actively sabotages the story and the character's motivations? And this is not the only instance of this either. Someone please explain to me, and I'm genuinely curious, why did they wait 3 months to even start thinking about avenging Joel? I'm being completely serious here because this was something that was utterly unnecessary and suggests that no one really cared about Joel, and it makes the revenge quest seem less urgent. Even worse, the show set everything up so perfectly only to ruin it. It would have been amazing if despite half of Jackson being killed by what happened in episode 2, Ellie and co would still be dead set on leaving Jackson to avenge Joel. This would take something that didn't happen in the game and use it to elevate the story, with Ellie saying, "Sorry, but I don't really care about y'all." But instead, she spends 3 months dicking around in Jackson only for it to suddenly occur to her that she wants to take revenge. Again, why? Why rob us of the visceral urgency of revenge that we felt in the game? The revenge story is fueled by two feelings that occur simultaneously from the same event: grief and anger. These feelings work synergistically to progress the revenge quest, but both are diminished by the crew waiting for 3 months. Or maybe they just waited because Joel is written in the show to be a spineless pussy who doesn't even deserve to be avenged. The show insists on painting him as the literal devil with no effort to humanize him, and it pisses me off that they couldn't even bother to have a single redeeming scene for Joel in Season 2. I'm 100% convinced this constant onslaught of Joel slander being done by the very people who created Joel is because they wanted so badly for people watching the show to suddenly turn on Joel after seeing what he did in the ending of Season 1.
When I read the ending to part 1, I was like, you're gonna piss a lot of people off.
The fact that they only supported him more, or at least empathized with him, definitely keeps the writers up at night. So they make up for it by writing Joel to be a nagging, emasculated husk, a punching bag for every female character around him. Even when Joel does something that's objectively correct, like killing Eugene to protect his community, the show pretends like it's his fault that he did what's best for everyone's safety. Only Ellie's too stupid to understand that, so she tells on him like a baby, and somehow we're supposed to side with her? It also doesn't help that the show is simultaneously hell-bent on writing Ellie to be a whimsical goofball who can't stop spreading her joyous whimsy around, which was maybe okay when she was in Jackson. But for some reason, after Joel's death, she's still a whimsical goofball.
I wasn't sure, okay? I didn't want to be a bird. Well, you're a bird now, aren't you? I'm gonna be a dad.
It's as if Joel's death meant nothing to her, which again makes it seem like she never cared about Joel. And let's face it, this is also partly because Bella's acting is subpar. You don't feel anger towards Abby unless you believe Ellie is feeling that same anger. And you don't believe Ellie is feeling that same anger because Bella can barely express her emotions with any nuance. The writing and acting both need to be good for the story to work, and neither are. This ends up turning Ellie into an annoying, bratty child. Even 14-year-old game Ellie acts more mature than 19-year-old Ellie in the show.
How about, hey, Ellie, I know it wasn't easy, but it was either him or me. Thanks for saving my ass. You got anything like that for me, Joel?
Versus,
I got bit, everybody!
Hey.
I got bit!
Hey! Hey!
I'm immune!
Whoa! Hey!
even worse, this immaturity indirectly makes the flashbacks worse too. In the game, it was a breath of fresh air to see a younger, more optimistic Ellie to juxtapose the constant barrage of death and misery in Seattle. Here, 15-year-old Ellie's mannerisms are no different than at 19 years old. She's too childish at 19, and it doesn't really fit in when you consider the whole death wish to get revenge on the person who killed your father thing. Ellie just comes off as super indifferent regarding Joel's death here. On the contrary, Dina acts more like Ellie than Ellie. Most of the traits people were expecting from Ellie were just transferred onto Dina for no apparent reason. She's more focused on avenging Joel than Ellie, who just comes off as an incompetent child tagging along for the ride for the shits and giggles. It seems like Ellie thinks she's taking a road trip with her bestie, and this does nothing to improve the story. It only serves to dilute Ellie's character and motivations. Dina, however, is the best character this season in my opinion. And forgive me for being hyperbolic, but she carries this season on her frickin' back. Her emotions were on point. She seemed orders of magnitude more competent than Ellie, and she might be the only character who I think is improved compared to the game. But this isn't saying much because the pacing in this show is atrocious anyways. Season 1 was sort of rushed in its own right, but a 7-episode season covering like half of the second game, which itself is longer than the entire first game? Come on, guys. Fundamental problems aside, this season would be much better if it was 10 episodes rather than 7. Slow the hell down, people. There's no reason to be jumping between things so quickly. The pacing would give even Max Verstappen some whiplash, and despite that, this season still manages to be so disjointed that it feels like nothing happened across all 7 of its episodes. To put this into perspective, Joel's death is given 20 minutes to happen. In about the same time frame during episode 7, Ellie takes a boat, leaves the boat, gets hung, gets back on the boat, kills Mel and Owen, sees Jesse get killed, and faces Abby. Why the big hurry? Besides, everything in this episode feels like a cheap knockoff of the game, especially Mel's death, which has done such a disservice here. I don't know why, but they downplayed her death and went for a version that feels so watered down compared to the game that it's disrespectful. Instead of defending herself, Ellie unintentionally shoots Mel with a collateral bullet. This feels to me like a corny way to make Ellie come off as innocent because she didn't kill Mel, guys. It was the bullet that killed her.
I was looking for you. I didn't mean to hurt them. I'm gonna find and I'm gonna kill every last one of them. I was looking for you. I didn't mean to hurt them.
Why not have characters do horrible things and face the consequences? They played it safe when they shouldn't have. In fact, everything down to the costume design feels safe and tepid. The clothing and people look overly sanitized for a world like The Last of Us. The game was dirty, while here, it feels like everything is very clean. Ellie looks like she just bought her outfit from the H&M racks, and Dina's hair looks like she just walked out of the hair salon.
The strange benefits of the apocalypse.
This is supposed to be the apocalypse, not the Met Gala. Both of them don't have a single defect on their face, and what's worse is that a few moments did get the look right. So clearly they can do it, they just chose not to. But those are minor nitpicks that I can get over. What I cannot get over is that maybe Season 2 was doomed from the start. This is because of ludonarrative dissonance, which is when the game's story doesn't match its gameplay. The worst example of ludonarrative dissonance is Naughty Dog's own Nathan Drake, who is shown in cutscenes as a charming, funny, morally decent guy. But when you play the game, he mows down literally thousands of enemies during gameplay without a shred of remorse. This disconnect is a huge problem, especially in a story game like Uncharted. It's perhaps by confronting this flaw that Naughty Dog was able to create something better, the first Last of Us. The first game perfected the harmony between narrative and gameplay. Joel is a hardened man, shaped by decades of trauma. His violent actions make sense here. They're brutal, but grounded in the story. The second game, on the other hand, was comparatively full of ludonarrative dissonance. If you watched gameplay, you'd be forgiven to think that Ellie was John motherfucking Wick. Cutscenes tell a different story. She's still a rough, battle-hardened individual, but she's nowhere near as proficient as Joel. For example, Joel does his signature interrogation move and succeeds, and so does Tommy. But Ellie tries doing the same thing and fails miserably because she lets her guard down. This is a huge contrast compared to the Terminator Ellie we see in gameplay. So I have to wonder, maybe Ellie was never this competent to begin with. Maybe, through our direct connection with gameplay, we developed the false impression that Ellie was way more capable than she actually is. Because if you compare her behavior during gameplay versus those in cutscenes, the cutscenes give off the vibe that Ellie is more emotionally driven than she is tactically driven. So maybe HBO didn't get Ellie wrong. We did. But still, the game's Ellie, even at her most inept, is still vastly more capable than show Ellie. This leaves me with one thing that I feel must be said. The Last of Us never really should have been adapted into a show. It already had an incredible story and was made for an interactive medium where player involvement heightened the emotional impact. In the show, the lack of player interactivity kind of dampens it. You can't just copy-paste a story from video game to TV without taking the lack of interactivity into account. HBO not only didn't take that into account, but they changed things for no reason while forgetting why these things are so important for the story in the first place. So, I hate to be a gatekeeper, but The Last of Us should have remained a video game. It breaks my heart that now, some people will only know the show's version of The Last of Us, and the only Ellie they'll ever know is Bella Ramsey when the games are leagues above the show in every way. The Last of Us Part 2 is in no way perfect, but after watching Season 2 of the show, anything looks perfect in comparison.